The North American prairies were once a vast and vibrant ecosystem, teeming with tall grasses, wildflowers, and countless animal species. Among them roamed the iconic American bison, swift foxes, burrowing owls, and small mammals that made the prairies their home. But today, this landscape is among the most damaged ecosystems on the continent. What happened? Centuries of human activity, agriculture, ranching, hunting, and urban development have dramatically reshaped the prairies. Grasslands were plowed under to grow crops. Livestock replaced native grazers. Cities and highways carved up once continuous habitat, and slowly, the web of life that once defined the prairie began to unravel. However, an unlikely hero is now helping to reverse this damage. A small, often misunderstood animal once considered a pest is now at the heart of prairie restoration efforts. The prairie dog. Yes, prairie dogs, those squirrel-sized rodents with high-pitched calls and bustling underground colonies, are turning out to be a keystone species in one of the most important ecological recoveries in North America. But how did a creature so small come to play such a big role in saving an entire ecosystem? Let's explore that story. Before European settlers arrived in North America, prairie dogs thrived across the western plains. From southern Canada to northern Mexico, they inhabited millions of acres of grassland. Some estimates suggest that more than 5 billion prairie dogs lived on the continent prior to the 1800s. Their complex underground burrows and constant grazing helped maintain the prairie's open structure, supporting countless other species. But with the arrival of settlers, everything changed. Settlers saw the prairie not as a delicate ecosystem, but as land to be used. They brought plows, cattle, and fences. Native grasslands were rapidly converted into farmland. Cattle replaced bison, and any animals that interfered with farming or ranching were labeled pests. Prairie dogs were especially targeted. Though they weren't hunted for fur or meat, ranchers viewed prairie dogs as a nuisance. Their burrows, which include chambers for sleeping, raising pups, and hiding from predators, left holes across the land. Holes that ranchers feared could injure livestock. Prairie dogs were also accused of eating the grasses that cattle needed to graze. In response, ranchers began exterminating them, first through shooting, later through mass poisoning campaigns. But prairie dogs faced another deadly threat. In the early 1900s, ships arriving from Asia brought rats infected with fleas, carrying bubonic plague. The disease spread to prairie dogs, often wiping out entire colonies in days. The plague also increased fear among humans, who pushed for further extermination, fearing the disease could spread to livestock or people. Governments joined in. In the 1980s, South Dakota alone authorized poisoning over 494,000 acres of prairie dog habitat, one of the last major colonies in the U.S. Add to this the steady march of urban sprawl, and prairie dog habitat shrank dramatically. By the early 2000s, it's estimated that 96 to 98% of all prairie dogs had been wiped out, and their range reduced to a mere 5% of its original size. Here's the irony. Much of the extermination was based on myths. Studies have shown that injuries to cattle from prairie dog holes are extremely rare. As for the plague, scientists have found that prairie dogs aren't the carriers, fleas are. In fact, since 1949, out of nearly 500 documented cases of livestock infected with plague, only 23 were even potentially linked to prairie dogs. In other words, prairie dogs were unfairly blamed and almost wiped out for no valid reason. Yet as prairie dogs disappeared, people began to notice something troubling. The ecosystems they left behind began to collapse. Fast forward to 2008 in southern Arizona, where conservationists took a bold step. The black-tailed prairie dog, once widespread in the region, had been eradicated in the 1960s through poisoning. But researchers had come to understand that the species played a vital role in prairie health. Working with private landowners and government agencies, wildlife officials began reintroducing prairie dogs, starting with 78 individuals relocated from New Mexico. Today, more than 300 prairie dogs have established themselves on 36 acres of restored prairie in Arizona, and their numbers are rising quickly. Prairie dogs breed rapidly when conditions are favorable. A similar story unfolded in Chihuahua, Mexico. Prairie dogs were once common there, too, until agriculture and hunting drove them nearly to extinction by the late 1980s. In their absence, a hardy shrub called mesquite began to spread. With deep roots, mesquite thrives in dry conditions and attracts grazing animals that strip the land of what little grass remains. Without prairie dogs, large swaths of prairie turned into desert-like landscapes, and biodiversity plummeted. Then came the reintroduction. As soon as prairie dogs returned, the transformation was dramatic. Prairie dogs actively destroy mesquite because it blocks their view of predators. Within a single year, the mesquite began to vanish. Grasses returned, insects flourished, and wildlife followed. Locals began spotting badgers, pronghorns, and even golden eagles, birds that hadn't been seen in large numbers for decades. Researchers once counted more than 20 golden eagles in a single day, all of it sparked by the comeback of the prairie dog. Prairie dogs are what ecologists call a keystone species. Their impact on the ecosystem is far greater than their numbers might suggest. How? For starters, prairie dogs help maintain grassland structure. They clip and graze on grasses, keeping vegetation short and preventing shrubs and trees from taking over. Their burrowing churns and aerates the soil, bringing nutrients to the surface and improving plant growth. This benefits not just native flora, but also agriculture. Moreover, their burrows provide shelter for dozens of other animals, many of which couldn't survive without them. Take the burrowing owl, for example. It rarely digs its own burrow, preferring instead to live in old prairie dog tunnels. The same goes for golden-mantled ground squirrels, rabbits, and even reptiles. Larger predators, like foxes, coyotes, and badgers, rely on prairie dogs as a food source. And then there's the case of the black-footed ferret. Once thought extinct, this elusive carnivore was rediscovered in 1981. Since then, efforts have been made to reintroduce the ferret across parts of the US, Canada, and Mexico. But conservationists learned that ferret reintroduction couldn't succeed without first restoring prairie dog populations, because 90% of a black-footed ferret's diet is prairie dogs. So in many areas, prairie dogs were reintroduced first. Only then were ferrets brought back. By 2015, ferret populations had reached more than 200 individuals across 18 sites in Arizona, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Even animals that don't eat prairie dogs benefit from their presence. An ecological study in New Mexico's Sevalita National Wildlife Refuge demonstrated this clearly. Researchers reintroduced prairie dogs into a 22-acre patch of grassland. Nearby, they left an identical grassland untouched. Burrowing owls, rabbits, badgers, and birds of prey flocked to the area with prairie dogs. The identical grassland next door? Virtually empty. Let's take a detour to Pueblo, Colorado, home to the U.S. Army's Chemical Depot. You might assume this site, once used to store nearly 800,000 munitions and over 2,600 tons of mustard agent, would be barren. But surprisingly, it's home to one of the oldest undisturbed shortgrass prairies in the state. Why? Because the land, fenced off for security reasons, was left untouched for decades. And within it, a population of prairie dogs continued to thrive, supporting burrowing owls, golden eagles, foxes, and more. It's a strange twist. The same animal once poisoned and persecuted across the continent was quietly keeping one of the last strongholds of prairie biodiversity alive on a former chemical weapons site. Today, there's growing awareness of the prairie dog's role in restoring grassland ecosystems. But challenges remain. Some ranchers still view them as pests. Urban sprawl continues to chip away at their habitat, and climate change adds yet another layer of pressure. Still, their story is a hopeful one. Across North America, scientists, conservationists, and communities are coming together to give prairie dogs another chance. From the deserts of Mexico to the plains of Arizona and Colorado, they are reclaiming their role as guardians of the prairie, and the results speak for themselves. Once seen as vermin, prairie dogs are now viewed as ecological engineers, creatures that can heal the land simply by doing what they've always done: burrow, graze, and build homes for their neighbors. In saving prairie dogs, we just might save the prairies themselves. The United States ranks among the top countries where rivers are facing serious environmental challenges. Across the country, waterways are being transformed, degraded, and drained of their natural vitality. One of the primary culprits? Dams. These massive structures drastically alter the flow and behavior of rivers, turning lush floodplains into dry and barren lands. The impacts are visible everywhere: riverbank erosion, shrinking vegetation, and a sharp decline in both aquatic and riparian biodiversity. And if that wasn't bad enough, wildfires add another devastating layer to the destruction. When fires sweep through these vulnerable areas, they decimate what's left of ecosystems already on the brink. Yet, in an unexpected twist, scientists in Washington state have discovered a surprising ally in the battle to restore river health after such devastation: beavers. Yes, beavers, the tree-gnawing, dam-building rodents many people overlook, are showing that they might just be key players in bringing rivers back to life. What started as a bold experiment is now providing measurable results. So, are beavers saving Washington's rivers? Let's take a closer look. When we talk about degraded American rivers, one name stands out: the Mississippi. As the nation's main waterway, it touches or influences 40% of the land in the continental United States. Its massive network of tributaries reaches deep into the heart of the country. But with that reach comes an enormous amount of human impact. A stark example of this is the Gulf of Mexico's infamous dead zone, a recurring area off the Louisiana coast, where marine life struggles to survive. This hypoxic zone forms every summer, driven by excess nutrients, nitrates and phosphates, carried into the river by farm runoff, industrial waste, and sewage. But pollution is only part of the story. The Mississippi River Basin is also losing critical habitats like floodplain forests and wetlands. These areas aren't just scenic, they're essential for maintaining biodiversity. Floodplain forests, which are naturally designed to withstand occasional flooding, are home to hundreds of species of birds, insects, amphibians, and mammals. During migration and nesting seasons, for instance, the upper Mississippi's floodplain forests support around 180 bird species. But the expansion of agriculture, urbanization, and infrastructure has taken a heavy toll. Since the 1800s, nearly half of the floodplain forest cover in the upper Mississippi region has vanished. In the lower Mississippi, just 30% of the land remains forested, a fraction of what once existed. The once resilient river system now suffers from chronic flooding, as its natural flood buffers have been stripped away. These floods cause millions in damage each year, to both the environment and local communities. While the Mississippi is a well-known symbol of environmental strain, the Pacific Northwest, with its dramatic landscapes and pristine-looking rivers, may not seem like part of the same story. But appearances can be deceiving. According to the Center for American Progress, over 46% of rivers in Washington have been altered by human activity. When you break it down further, the statistics are more alarming. 68% of large rivers and 42% of small rivers and streams in the state have been modified. This includes barriers like dams. Washington alone has 751 large ones, and vast stretches of river flowing through land that has been developed, logged, or otherwise disturbed. Before European colonization, wetlands and floodplain forests covered roughly 40 to 50% of the landscape in parts of Washington. But centuries of livestock grazing, farming, mining, and deforestation have radically reshaped these ecosystems. The result? Only 2% of those river-adjacent habitats remain today. And when wildfires hit, like the 2015 blaze along the Twisp River, the damage is often catastrophic, wiping out what little biodiversity remains. So, what can restore an area after it's been hammered by both human development and fire? Surprisingly, the answer is beavers. These furry ecosystem engineers were once abundant across the Pacific Northwest. Rivers like the Methow and its tributaries were teeming with beaver colonies. But the fur trade of the 18th and 19th centuries decimated their population. By the time Washington became a state, beavers had all but disappeared from many of their natural habitats. That changed in 2007 with the launch of the Methow Beaver Project. This initiative, led by biologists and conservationists, aimed to reintroduce beavers to degraded rivers and observe their impact. Following the 2015 fire, 3 beaver pairs were released into Black Canyon streams, part of the Methow watershed. When researchers returned after winter, they found that all the beavers had survived and had begun building dams. Within a short time, each site had 7 or more dams. These structures created deep ponds, slowed water flow, and began transforming the scorched landscape into something alive again. Beaver dams may seem simple, but their effects are profound. When a dam blocks a river or stream, it creates a pond. These ponds, in turn, rehydrate surrounding wetlands and floodplains, areas that may not have held water in decades due to human interference. Following the 2015 fire, researchers saw something remarkable. Around the beaver-built ponds, new plant life emerged: marsh grasses, shoreline species, and even young aspen trees. These wetlands began to attract wildlife. Deer, elk, and birds came back. The ecosystem was healing, not through human intervention, but through the natural behaviors of a few beavers. And while it may seem harsh, predators like coyotes and pumas returning to hunt beavers also indicate a rebound in biodiversity. In short, a balanced and functional ecosystem was returning. The role beavers play doesn't stop at habitat restoration. They are proving to be key allies in 2 of the most pressing climate-related challenges: drought and wildfire. Since 2008, over 300 beavers have been released in the upper Methow watershed through partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and salmon recovery funding. The ponds these beavers built aren't just homes, they're reservoirs. One beaver dam can store up to 1 million gallons of water. Across the entire project area, researchers documented 176 beaver-made ponds. Out of 62 surveyed ponds, scientists found they held nearly 5 million gallons of water in total. That's enough drinking water for the average household in Twisp, Washington, for 5 years. Collectively, all the beaver dams in the project store about 65 million gallons annually, enough for 24 years of household water supply in the area. Even more impressive, a study in the Columbia River Basin revealed that beaver complexes with 29 ponds held not just surface water, but about 6.6 million gallons underground. This slow-release system maintains cool, clean water throughout hot summers, even when nearby streams dry up. It's a natural form of drought resistance. In the context of wildfire, beaver ponds serve as natural fire breaks. Water doesn't burn, after all. After the 2015 fire in the Methow area, researchers observed that ponds created before the blaze had effectively stopped the fire in its tracks. On one side of the pond, the ground was scorched. On the other, untouched vegetation thrived. In at least one case, firefighters used a beaver pond as a water source to help control the blaze. Beavers have earned their reputation as a keystone species, animals that have a disproportionately large impact on their ecosystems. Their dams create conditions that allow dozens, if not hundreds, of other species to survive and flourish. And unlike many climate adaptation strategies, beaver restoration doesn't require billion-dollar infrastructure projects or complicated technology. It's simple. Give beavers a chance, and they'll do the rest. As droughts intensify and wildfires become more frequent and destructive, the need for resilient landscapes is urgent. Beavers offer a low-cost, natural method to help buffer ecosystems against these threats. They're not just repairing rivers, they're future-proofing them. So, the next time you hear the word beaver, think beyond the cartoonish dam builder. Think of them as quiet but powerful allies in the fight to save America's rivers. When we think of restoring degraded lands in the United States, we often imagine massive government programs, expensive technology, or years of painstaking manual labor. But surprisingly, one of the most powerful forces in land restoration has buck teeth and a flat tail. That's right, beavers. Before we dive into how these incredible creatures are transforming landscapes, let's start with the basics. One of the biggest reasons land becomes barren and unusable is soil degradation. Over time, overgrazing, deforestation, and poor farming practices wear down the soil until it can no longer support crops or even native vegetation. But not all hope is lost. Across the country, new strategies are being tested to heal the land and make it fertile once again. One of those strategies, controlled grazing. It's a way of rotating livestock between pastures to prevent overuse and allow grasses and roots to recover. Another method gaining attention is letting nature's engineers, the beavers, do what they do best: build dams and shape ecosystems. At first glance, beavers might seem like ordinary woodland critters. They gnaw on trees, slap their tails, and build dams. Cute, but nothing special, right? Wrong. What they do has massive ripple effects. Their dam-building instincts help store water, create wetlands, support wildlife, and even reverse environmental damage caused by humans. Take Arizona, for example, a state better known for its cacti and scorching deserts than for lush wetlands. But not long ago, something remarkable happened in a part of Arizona that had been degraded for generations. And it all started with the quiet return of a few humble beavers. Let's rewind the clock. Centuries ago, before European settlers arrived, North America was beaver country. From the frigid coasts of Alaska to the marshes of the Gulf of Mexico, beavers thrived. They shaped the landscape, carving out rivers and wetlands with their dams, creating rich, biodiverse environments. But then came the fur trade. Beavers had the misfortune of having incredibly valuable pelts. Their fur was warm, waterproof, and perfect for making hats and coats. Their castoreum, an oily substance secreted near the tail, was also highly prized for perfumes and medicines. And so began a ruthless hunt. In the early 1600s in New Netherland, a Dutch colony on the east coast, it's estimated that 80,000 beavers were killed every year, for 9 straight years. In Connecticut and Massachusetts, over 10,000 beavers were trapped annually between 1620 and 1630, and by 1670, companies like the Hudson's Bay Company were shipping countless beaver pelts from Canada to England. The east coast was quickly emptied of beavers, and hunters pushed westward. From 1806 to 1838, just 3 decades, beaver populations across much of the U.S. and Canada were nearly wiped out. The once abundant species teetered on the edge of extinction. One of the ecosystems that suffered most was the San Pedro River in southern Arizona. This river flows through the Sonoran Desert, a region known for its arid climate, extreme temperatures, and limited rainfall. But before the beaver hunt began, the San Pedro was something extraordinary. It was an oasis, a winding, life-giving stream surrounded by swamps, meadows, and vibrant forests. Beavers built sprawling ponds that supported fish, birds, and countless other species. In fact, early settlers were amazed by the sheer number of beavers. They dubbed the river Beaver River. But that didn't save the animals. Beavers were trapped en masse. And then came a fatal blow from an unlikely source. In the 1920s, the U.S. military got involved. Soldiers stationed at Fort Huachuca, located near the San Pedro, dynamited beaver dams to prevent stagnant water from becoming a breeding ground for mosquitoes, which they believed caused malaria. The destruction was devastating. The beavers disappeared, and so did the wetlands they had built. Over time, the San Pedro began to dry up. Without dams to hold water, the river lost its floodplains and wet meadows. Vegetation vanished. Birds stopped migrating there. Wildlife populations dropped. By the 1950s, the river only flowed during Arizona's brief rainy seasons. The once lush river corridor had become just another dry desert wash. And that's how things stayed for decades, until the late 1990s. When scientists, ecologists, and conservationists asked a radical question: what if the solution to restoring the San Pedro wasn't building artificial, but simply bringing back the beavers? From 1999 to 2002, the idea was put to the test. A small group of beavers, just 19 individuals, was reintroduced to the river in Cochise County, along a stretch of the San Pedro. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. By 2006, researchers counted over 30 dams built by the beavers. These weren't just piles of sticks, they were mini ecosystems. The dam slowed down the river's flow, which allowed water to spread out, seep into the ground, and refill underground aquifers. Ponds formed, wetlands returned, and with them came life. Birds began to reappear in numbers not seen for decades. Fish and insects flourished. The willow flycatcher, an endangered bird that had all but vanished from the region, returned to nest in the newly formed wetlands. Scientists monitoring 13 species of birds found a staggering 50% increase in population density in areas where beavers were active compared to areas without them. Beavers weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Some wandered away from the original release site. One intrepid adventurer was nicknamed the Surfing Beaver after drifting dozens of miles downriver to the Gila River. Others made their way to remote canyons or crossed the border into Mexico, where they started new colonies of their own. By 2009, the population had grown to somewhere between 30. In 2008, a massive flood hit the San Pedro. Unlike human-built dams, beaver dams are made of sticks and mud. They don't stand a chance against powerful floods. After the waters receded, researchers couldn't find a single dam. It looked like all the work had been washed away. But nature had a surprise in store. Just 1 year later, the beavers had rebuilt. By 2009, 30 new dams stood proudly in place. It was clear the resilient wetlands and the green corridors snaking through the desert. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all: sometimes, the best way to fix what humans broke is to let nature do the work. Beavers, with nothing but instinct and wood, managed to transform a nearly lifeless desert stream into a flourishing habitat. In a time when climate change, water scarcity, and habitat destruction loom large, their story offers hope and a blueprint for how we might reclaim other damaged lands across America. All it takes is a few rodents and a whole lot of sticks.
It's no secret that Australia is absolutely massive. The country spans the entire continent, covering a staggering 2.9 million square miles. That's plenty of room to stretch your legs. But when it comes to farming, not so much. You see, land degradation is one of the most serious and persistent challenges facing both the nation and the continent. Thanks to the combined effects of wind and water erosion, vegetation loss, and soil salinization, more than half of Australia's agricultural land requires treatment before it can yield anything worthwhile. To put things into perspective, degraded land makes up around 2/3 of Australia's total area. That's nearly triple the global average of 22% reported in 2022. If not for a somewhat unexpected hero, the situation might be even worse. Enter sheep. Yes, the woolly kind. Australians discovered an ingenious way to use sheep, specifically their wool, to breathe life back into barren soil. Let's explore how these animals have become surprising saviors of Australia's struggling landscape. First, take a look at this map. The darker the country, the more sheep it has as of 2025. As always, China tops the list. It currently has about 194 million sheep roaming its vast lands. India follows with around 75 million. And then there's Australia. Despite its severe land degradation, the country is home to more than 70 million sheep. Now, that's a lot of sheep. But are they raised to fight land degradation? Not exactly, at least, not initially. The primary reason for such large herds is economic. Sheep are a major source of both meat and wool. In the 2024 to 2025 fiscal year, Australia exported approximately 657,000 tons of meat, an increase of 50% compared to a decade earlier. What gives Australia an edge is the efficiency of its sheep farms. They produce between 5 and 10 times more meat per hour of labor than most of their global competitors. That kind of productivity is essential, especially when labor costs in Australia are roughly 10 times higher than in countries like China. But sheep aren't just useful for meat. Their wool is another powerhouse commodity. Every so often, you'll hear incredible stories, like that of a sheep wandering the wilds of Australia for years without ever being sheared. One such animal, dubbed a fashionista, carried an astonishing 44 pounds of wool on her body. And she wasn't even that old. Another sheep was found with an unbelievable 77 pounds of wool clinging to it, clearly a record breaker. On average, a domestic sheep lives around 13 years and can produce between 110 to 154 pounds of wool in its lifetime. With over 70 million sheep across the country, you can imagine how much wool Australia produces. In fact, the country is responsible for about 45% of the world's wool supply. That's nearly half of all the wool used globally, an astounding figure. But it's not just the quantity that makes Australian wool stand out, it's also the quality. Much of that reputation comes from one specific breed, the Australian Merino. These sheep, first brought from South Africa in the 1790s, have adapted remarkably well to the Australian climate. Over time, they become renowned for producing the finest and softest wool on the planet. Merino wool is widely considered superior to any other fiber, whether natural or synthetic. While standard wool might be used for things like bedding and upholstery, Merino is all about premium fashion, high-performance sportswear, and even luxury undergarments. Thanks to this breed, Australia has become the wool capital of the world. But even this thriving industry isn't immune to economic pressure. The wool market peaked back in 2018 to 2019. Since then, prices have plummeted. At the lowest point, wool was selling for just $800 Australian dollars per 100 kilograms, about 220 pounds. Today, it's recovered somewhat, up to 1,200 Australian dollars, but that's still far below its former highs. Faced with dropping demand and high storage costs, many producers found themselves with a difficult choice. Hold on to their wool and hope for a price rebound, or dump it and cut their losses. Some resorted to discarding the wool altogether. But others came up with a smarter solution: turn it into something that could help solve another of Australia's biggest problems: degraded soil. Enter wool pellets. These small, compact bits of wool are produced by feeding raw wool into machines that compress it into fertilizer-sized pieces. They're easy to use and ideal for Australia's drought-stricken lands. Unlike chemical fertilizers, wool pellets are all natural, and they're proving incredibly effective. Australia's need for sustainable solutions became especially clear after the devastating bushfires of 2019 to 2020. These fires were triggered by one of the most extreme droughts in recent history. In Sydney, rainfall was practically non-existent, just 0.08 inches over an extended period, and temperatures soared to 104 degrees Fahrenheit 40 degrees Celsius. The fires made international headlines, but their aftermath was just as concerning. Vast stretches of forest dried out. Farmlands in states like New South Wales and Queensland turned to dust. And here's the troubling part: scientists say this won't be a one-off event. Extreme droughts will keep happening, and the land will continue to degrade unless sustainable countermeasures are implemented. That's where wool pellets come in. One of their standout features is water retention. These pellets can absorb up to 20 times their weight in water and release it gradually, depending on the soil's needs. This reduces irrigation demands and keeps plants hydrated longer. Though not a miracle cure, their effects are already visible. Some arid areas treated with wool pellets are beginning to show signs of greening again. But that's not all. Wool breaks down slowly, over about 6 months, providing a gentle, continuous release of nutrients into the soil. Raw wool contains around 50% carbon, 14.6% nitrogen, 5% sulfur, and trace amounts of calcium, magnesium, and iron. Think of it as a slow-release fertilizer that enriches the soil without the harsh impact of synthetic alternatives. Wool pellets also help improve soil porosity, a critical factor in promoting healthy plant roots and overall plant growth. And surprisingly, they're also effective at pest control. Snails and slugs, which can devastate young plants, won't cross a border of wool pellets. The reason? The tiny natural fibers irritate their soft undersides, creating a safe, chemical-free barrier. Another innovative use of wool in agriculture is as mulch. Traditionally made from organic materials like bark or straw, mulch helps conserve moisture, suppress weeds, and regulate soil temperature. But wool mulch? It's next level. In fact, you could call it mulch on steroids. Let's talk plums. In 2024, Australia earned about $67 million from plum production. It's not the country's biggest export, but it's significant. Farmers looking to boost their yields began wrapping plum trees in a layer of wool padding mixed with cornstarch. The results were nothing short of remarkable. Fruit yields rose by 37%, the size and weight of the plums increased by nearly 49%, and the nutritional value improved across the board. The technique was later tested on strawberries, with equally impressive results. Wool mulch also stabilizes soil temperature, reducing daytime and nighttime fluctuations by 3.6 to 5.4 degrees Celsius during the hot summer months. Combined with its water retention capabilities, this makes it an ideal solution for Australia's scorching climate. And here's something you probably didn't expect: wool blankets. Yes, actual blankets made from 100% wool are now being composted in Australia. Since wool is biodegradable and the blankets are made from pure material, people began experimenting. They mixed old wool blankets with food waste and wrapped them in mesh to form compost bundles. Over the next 5 weeks, they added more food scraps and carbon-rich material, simulating a natural decomposition process. These experiments revealed something incredible. Wool compost significantly enriched the soil, just like the pellets and mulch. And since the country already had warehouses filled with unused wool, it was a practical and sustainable way to recycle a valuable resource. In the face of land degradation, drought, and market instability, Australians are showing remarkable ingenuity. By reimagining the role of sheep wool, from clothing material to agricultural tool, they've turned a looming environmental crisis into an opportunity for innovation. It's a compelling reminder that sometimes, the solutions to our biggest problems are already hiding in plain sight, wrapped in fleece and grazing quietly on the horizon.
China's agricultural land is shrinking, and fast. That may come as a surprise for a country that's been turning deserts green, tree by tree, acre by acre. But while environmental restoration is a long game, degradation moves quickly. Between industrial development, booming cities, and widespread pollution, China is losing valuable farmland every year. By the end of 2019, China's total arable land measured just under 494,000 square miles. That's a big number on paper, but it's a 6% drop from just a decade earlier, in 2009. The causes are clear: relentless urban expansion, growing industrial demands, inefficient farming practices, and serious environmental degradation. But China's response to this agricultural crisis includes a rather unexpected ally: the crayfish. Yes, crayfish, those small freshwater crustaceans with snapping claws. It sounds strange, even absurd, but these little creatures are playing an outsized role in not just revitalizing farmland, but also in fighting poverty and transforming rural economies. Their journey from exotic novelty to agricultural powerhouse is one of the most fascinating stories in modern farming. The species making waves in China is Procambarus clarkii, commonly known as the red swamp crayfish. It's native to the southern United States, not East Asia. In fact, for most of China's history, crayfish weren't even part of the local ecosystem or cuisine. So how did they get there? The introduction of crayfish dates back to the Second Sino-Japanese War between 1937 and 1945. At the time, crayfish were kept as pets by some Japanese, and many were brought along during the occupation of parts of China. From there, they slowly made their way into China's rivers, lakes, and rice paddies, spreading quietly, unnoticed by most. For decades, they remained relatively obscure, but by the early 1990s, the story started to change. A culinary trend began to take hold. Crayfish dishes, often spicy, stewed, or soaked in wine, gained popularity in restaurants and street stalls across China. The public couldn't get enough. It was a culinary explosion that no one saw coming. Today, China consumes over 90% of the world's crayfish supply. That's more than 1 million tons of crayfish devoured each year. With such massive demand, it was only a matter of time before farming operations ramped up. From small family-run ponds to massive industrial-scale farms, crayfish cultivation has become a national phenomenon. According to China's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, crayfish farming was already significant back in 2007. with an annual output of 265,000 tons. Less than a decade later, in 2016, that number had more than tripled to 850,000 tons. Wild-caught crayfish added another 49,000 tons to the total. But the real boom was yet to come. By 2022, China's crayfish production reached a staggering 2.5 million tons. The entire industry was valued at over 369 billion yuan, or about 53 billion US dollars. That's more than the GDP of some small countries. Crayfish were no longer just a culinary trend. They had become a cornerstone of the rural economy. One standout example is Shui County, located in eastern China's Jiangsu province. Known as the crayfish capital of China, Shui has transformed its economy around these crustaceans. By 2025, the county had established 165,000 acres of eco-friendly crayfish farming zones. Over 210,000 residents, more than the population of Salt Lake City, work in crayfish-related industries. Even the crayfish themselves have evolved. Through selective breeding, local farmers developed a line of crayfish that grow larger and reach maturity faster than the original imports. This faster-growing strain can earn farmers an additional 500 yuan per mu, a Chinese land measurement equal to about 1/6 of an acre. It's a significant economic boost in rural areas, where incomes are often limited. In Hubei province, another crayfish stronghold, the city of Xinjiang proudly boasts a 49-foot-tall crayfish statue, the tallest in the world, officially listed in the Guinness Book of Records. The city has become a tourist destination, often called the Eco-City of Crayfish, with restaurants, educational tours, and scenic farming zones all built around the industry. At one processing plant alone in Xinjiang, 500 workers handle 80 tons of crayfish in just a 10-hour shift. Multiply that by the hundreds of facilities scattered across China, and it becomes clear. This is not just a food item, it's a national enterprise. But perhaps the most fascinating development of all is how crayfish are being integrated directly into agriculture, specifically into rice farming. This method is known as integrated crayfish rice farming, and it's proving to be one of China's most promising sustainable farming innovations. The idea is simple yet ingenious. Farmers plant rice in their paddies as usual, but they also dig circular trenches around the fields. These serve as habitats for crayfish. After the rice is harvested, the leftover straw is left in the field, and the paddies are flooded, creating an ideal nursery for young crayfish. The straw provides warmth and shelter during cooler months and eventually decomposes, becoming food for the crayfish. As omnivorous scavengers, crayfish feed on detritus, decomposing plant material, and small aquatic organisms. Their constant foraging keeps the paddies clean and reduces pests. Meanwhile, crayfish waste acts as a natural fertilizer, releasing organic carbon, nitrogen, and potassium, essential nutrients for rice growth. And there's more. When crayfish die, their bodies decompose and further enrich the soil. This cycle significantly reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and pesticides, resulting in cleaner, healthier rice and less environmental pollution. A study published in the Chinese Journal of Ecological Agriculture monitored integrated crayfish rice systems from 2005 to 2015. The results showed that these systems significantly outperformed traditional monoculture rice fields in terms of soil health, biodiversity, and yield. Before 2014, farmers would rotate between crayfish and rice on the same fields, but the introduction of mixed farming changed everything. By 2015, 93% of local farms in participating regions had adopted this integrated approach. According to a 2018 report by the Ministry of Agriculture, crayfish production in one city doubled in a single year, reaching 70,000 tons in 2017. This method is now widely seen as a way to maximize yields, increase rural incomes, and make use of less fertile soil, all without compromising environmental sustainability. As revolutionary as this farming method is, it's not without its downsides. First, growing rice and crayfish together isn't as easy as it might seem. It requires technical knowledge, careful planning, and precise water management. Crayfish are resilient, but they're also opportunistic feeders. If managed poorly, they can start damaging the rice crop they're meant to support. Then there's the issue of land use. To create permanent crayfish habitats, many farmers dig deep trenches and flood fields year-round. This shift from seasonal to permanent flooding reduces the availability of dry land, especially for winter crops like wheat, barley, and rye. That's a serious concern. While rice remains China's primary grain, with 207.5 million tons produced in 2024, wheat is close behind at 140.1 million tons. Wheat is essential for bread, noodles, dumplings, and other staples. Reducing wheat output could strain China's food security, especially as demand continues to rise. One striking example comes from the Yangtze River Basin, where over 1.6 million acres of rice and crayfish fields used to support winter wheat cultivation. Now, much of that land stays underwater year-round, making it unsuitable for wheat farming. And that's just one region. This growing tension between aquaculture and dry farming raises important questions. Can China strike a balance between maximizing income from crayfish and protecting long-term grain supplies? Can integrated systems evolve to support both summer and winter crops? Despite the challenges, China's crayfish experiment has captured the attention of the world. It's a rare example of an invasive species being transformed into a tool for sustainable farming, poverty alleviation, and even national pride. From obscure foreign invader to economic driver, crayfish have changed the face of rural China. They've turned remote counties into thriving communities, reduced reliance on chemical fertilizers, and offered a viable path for regenerating degraded land.